Look, it's Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles, Rosenberg.
Yeah.
And some of you may know this gentleman from Twitter, as well as if you're in Baltimore, you may know this man because he's about to make a major move. He's working on it. His name is Deray McKesson. Am I saying it right, McKesson?
Deray, yes.
Deray. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. I was familiarized with you through Twitter. Became a follower of yours when you were on the ground in Ferguson. And didn't know much about you and just follow your words and the things that you cover. And then after what took place in Baltimore, which you're from Baltimore, you now are running for mayor of Baltimore. I saw that. I thought it was amazing. I read your letter, which you were very vulnerable about not being a politician. Right. That's not what your original calling in life was, but you feel like your city needs you and someone like you from there that's active and that can bring what the people need and what the politics of Baltimore needs to come out of this, we'll call it this fog, this darkness, and to become what Baltimore will be. Yeah. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, you're right. You know, I think about stories of recovery often. Both my parents were drug addicts. My father raised us. My mother left when I was 3. We took our first family photo this Christmas. And I say that because I've seen people put their lives back together, this notion that we are like more than our pain. And I think about that in terms of the city so much. That one of the ways that people go into recovery is they have these rock bottom moments, right? They hit rock bottom. In Baltimore, we've hit rock bottom, right? Like 344 murders is rock bottom. A school system that doesn't meet the needs of kids is rock bottom. And we can get out of that. So I'm running to offer a plan and a strategy that focuses on these issues at scale. You know, we have 70,000 addicts, 41% of our adults are illiterate. Like, we have to figure out how to do this at scale.
So, and then for the people watching who may have only seen tweets or retweets of yours, they may not actually have ever heard you speak before, other than on social media. I want to go back and talk about kind of your history, because when we were researching for this conversation, I know Rosenberg, you found some very interesting things. Laura Stiles, I want to paint the whole
depending on what you Googled.
No. It's not bad stuff. But you're a very intelligent, hard work. You know, like, this isn't. You didn't just jump on Twitter one day and be on the front lines in Ferguson. Like, you've been, on this path of who we're going to see you become for some time. So.
Yeah, so my work before Ferguson was about children, youth, and families. I taught here in New York, in East New York, Brooklyn, Star City. I worked at the Harlem Children's Zone, helped lead one of their largest community centers, about 500 kids a day. 1,400 families a cycle, then moved back to Baltimore and did more work in education, worked for 3 public school districts. But with St. Louis, it was August 16th, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting on my couch. I saw it on Twitter, and I was like, I want to go. I was in Minneapolis. I got up off the couch, drove 9 hours, didn't know anybody in St. Louis. I put on Facebook, I'm going. I hope that somebody can find somewhere for me to stay. 7 hours in Iowa, I got a call being like, Teray, we found somebody. Who found somebody? And that was how I started. So that first night I was in St. Louis, I was just bearing witness. I wasn't a protester, but the second night I was there was the first night of the curfew, and I got tear gas for the first time. And it was in that moment that I was like, this is just not the America I know, right? Like, I'll do whatever it takes for this not to be anybody else's experience. And when I think about kids, it was this thing about, like, you got to be alive to learn, right? And, like, Tamir will never have a high school teacher. Mike Brown will never have a college professor. And I'm doing all this work to recruit teachers and da-da-da. And it's not going to matter for Ayanna Jones or Rakia Boyd, which is when my work changed.
And so now, talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Because I'm an outsider to it. Like, I'm somebody who follows it on Twitter, talks about it in media, but I don't profess to be at every protest and be involved in everything. But the things that you hear when you're in the media, there are 3 people or women, I think, who founded the Black Lives Matter movement. And then you had people saying that they were part of the Black Lives Matter movement and other people saying that they're not. What is it from you being kind of at the forefront of this discussion over the last couple of years now?
Yep. So the movement is bigger than any one person, any one organization.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded that in St. Louis and Ferguson, there was no one person, 2 people, 3 people that started anything. It was like people who came outside and saw Mike's body in the street for 4.5 hours and said, we're not going to take it anymore, right? And said that we refuse to go home. We're going to come out every day until there's something that changes. So we spent 9 months sort of helping people understand that, A, there was a crisis, and the crisis was much closer to them than they thought. You know, in the beginning, people were like, Ferguson is screwed up, right? They weren't like, oh, no, this is happening in my city too. And it took the death of Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Walter Scott for people to say, okay, something's wrong across the country. And then we moved into this phase of, do the protesters have goals, right? So we met with Bernie, Hillary, President Obama, Valerie Jarrett, Loretta Lynch, to help people see that they're like real demands. I think that what comes next is coalition building. Like, can we invite more people into the space? And then can we push on the outside and the inside together?
How does it feel when you see some conservatives put you guys on lists, or the Black Lives Matter movement on lists of hate groups? And there was a period there when they were trying to say that you guys were a hate group.
Yeah, so we know that this country has never welcomed Black people or marginalized people organizing, right? That it is COINTELPRO with the Panthers, right? There's a history of this.
Yeah.
I think that what is different now is that social media has allowed us to organize in ways that are harder to disrupt, right? That we have been able to build community differently, and that's really powerful. So I think about I was labeled like a high threat actor when we were in Baltimore.
Really?
And
I sensed the danger when he walked in, by the way.
Yeah.
He's very intimidating.
But, if anything happens, I can, like, tell everybody immediately, right? Like, we can, like, immediately say, like, here's what happened. And, like, I was telling them earlier that, I got a death threat at a movie theater in Baltimore, and they had to evacuate the movie theater and all this stuff.
How did that play? Like, you're sitting at the movies?
That was for an event, right?
Yeah, I'd announced that I was going to be there because we were doing a talk, and somebody tweeted in there was going to be a shooting. And the police came, did a sweep in the middle of the movie. They evacuate the movie theater. All the employees are too afraid to stay. It's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And those things make this moment a little different than it's ever been in the civil rights work. But still, like, I know that people want us to be afraid, So if I don't come back out tomorrow, like, that gives people exactly what they want. And, like, that just, I have to, be in my convictions that this is the right work to do,
I saw you went to Bowdoin. How did you end up? It didn't sound like you're from the easiest circumstance in Baltimore. Where exactly are you from in Baltimore?
From West Baltimore, like Poplar Grove and Pressbury.
Okay. And then how'd you end up at Bowdoin College, which is, for people who don't know, a very small liberal arts school in Maine?
Yeah, I don't, this story is not probably the best example for people, but I didn't want to go to AP Government. I didn't want to go. And I was confident that I could pass the test without going to that class. So I was like, I'm going to go down to guidance for a second. So I walked down to guidance, and they're like, Bowdoin College is coming to visit today. And I'm like, oh, can't go to AP Government. I got to go to this college visit. And,
what school is this, by the way? Where were you in high school?
I don't even want to say. You'll get me in trouble.
Why?
Don't get him in trouble.
Because he didn't go to AP.
Because I didn't go to AP Government.
I think, I got to be honest with you, though. I think people will be able to find out what high school you went to. I'm pretty confident.
Well, let them do the work. So,
All right.
so I was the only person who signed up for Bowdoin. Like, literally, it was just me and the woman, and Liz, and she was great. And I was like, she's really great. I think I'm going to apply there. And that was it. Like, that's how I was going to go to College Park, which is a big state school, GW in D.C., or Bowdoin. But I applied to Bowdoin because I was the only person in the info session, and she was really great. I loved it, though. It was a great school.
Did you get money? Did they offer you money?
They did,
yeah. Bowdoin's a pretty expensive private school, right?
It is. And when I finally visited, I was like, I didn't even know a place like this existed, right? I didn't know that I could be that I would have an English class where he gave us a single space type sheet of feedback on every paper we wrote. That's how we got our grades. That is the college I knew. I didn't know that wasn't everybody's college experience. Or we had like lobster bisque in the dining hall, duck rabbit. We had the best food in the country. And only after leaving, I was like, oh, this was sort of a much different experience than most people. But
I went to College Park. We didn't have lobster bisque. I love the cafeteria in College Park, but it wasn't it.
No
lobster
lobster
bisque is very good.
No, I'm sure. So after that...
Oh, octopus. I went back to visit, and I'm like, is there octopus in the dining hall? Like, that's just so intense. But
it's very intense. So you finished school, and it actually sounds like more when you hear about what you've done over the last few years, you sound like you do have more of a past preparing for potentially a career in politics than I previously realized. You know what I mean? In terms of being a community organizer and being involved in things for children and programs that actually help people.
Yeah.
And actually, because to be honest, even though a lot of our politicians turn out to be terrible dickheads, for many of them, at some point, even the bad ones, they start out being involved in trying to do good things. And of course, some like President Obama go on to do great things. But had you had a vision of potentially having a leadership role when you went and you taught in East New York and things of that nature?
Not back then. I've always been trying to figure out where can I have impact that actually changes people's lives, right? And the movement, I, along with so many other people, helped change the national conversation about race. And then it became like, how do we actually change people's real lives, right? Like their todays and their tomorrows. Teaching was that for me. It was important for me to be a Black man teaching Black kids. And, I was a math teacher. So all these kids were like really math phobic. They didn't think they were smart enough. And it was like helping them see that they already had these gifts. And my job was like to help them unlock it, right? And when I think about being mayor, it's about putting into place like the actual, like ending cash bail. We say that, and people are like, well, they can't imagine a world where there's not like money bail, DC ended money bail decades ago, and like the world didn't end, right? Like there are all of these things that we could actually do. Adult literacy, we can make a diploma granting high school for adults that could be an alternative to the GED. Like it seems like Baltimore's like thousands of people take the GED and like maybe 200 people pass. I mean, so all you're getting from the GED prep class is dead. You didn't learn anything and you don't have a GED, right? And we know that doesn't work for people, and we can actually do stuff. And people are worried about talking publicly about bail bondsmen because they have so much clout, right? They have a lot of money. The GED prep programs are money-making enterprises. But like people aren't getting what they need, and like somebody has to be able to say that stuff in public, and there are very few people who are willing to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
Well, because they're afraid of themselves being hurt in another way in their own, whether it's personally, right? Because some of these people you go at the cops or you go at bail bondsmen, or they take it out on a family member, or they sitting outside your house, or they're doing, these things happen. And a lot of people live in this space where they don't believe that this stuff happens. You have the kid in Staten Island who actually filmed the choking incident, and he's still getting fucked with now. When you're young and you live in a neighborhood, it's easy to become a target sometimes. How do you plan to articulate? Because you have people who are at a certain economic bracket. Yep. Right. And then you have people who want to be at that economic bracket. And somewhere in the middle, there's got to be, that's where the mayor or whatever government politician comes into play to kind of articulate, hey, somebody's got to pay for these people to get their needs met so that we have a better working class. And that working class gives people more hope, and they can move from underclass to lower class, or lower class to middle class, or middle class to upper class by putting in work and getting their needs met. How are you as mayor going to tackle that for Baltimore? Because a lot of that is job creation, right? Getting corporations to come to the city and want to employ people and create a life for families who want to work for those companies. And I know it's a big thing for a mayor. Yeah. How do you plan on delving into that? Because that's kind of that heavy lifting of playing that political game.
So I push you and say that people are already paying for it, right?
Okay.
Like the crime and the violence is a manifestation of the failures of all this stuff. So you're already paying for it. You're paying a high property tax in Baltimore, and you don't feel like you're getting the return on your investment. Like that is the cost. You are already paying for it. So we think about increasing the minimum wage at the state level to $15. Small business owners are like, Deray, I'm really worried. It's like the reality is these low wages lead to high turnover at your job and low productivity, right? So a higher wage would actually mean that people need less jobs, in their life. And they're going to be more productive for you. Like that's actually a net benefit for you. You think about adult literacy, like people who can't read, they're entering these careers that like they don't have the skills to do what they could do for you as a business owner when they can't read,
That's right.
So helping people understand that you are already paying for it. And if we can fix it, that the cost will be less to you personally, but the benefit will be so much greater. And that is so many of the problems that plague cities, and you think about so much of it is at scale. So you think about a city with 70,000 addicts. At my own family, I think of is like, we know that inpatient treatment works, right? 30-day, people need like 30-day treatment. What we invest in are like outpatient, like, come in Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Like that doesn't work. Like it hasn't worked. Methadone clinics like that. But you talk about injection sites like Ithaca, and people get really nervous about it. And what's interesting about injection sites, for instance, is that the research suggests that they might actually be a pathway to treatment.
What is an injection site for?
Yeah, I don't know what an injection site is.
It's essentially like safe spaces to inject
Do your
heroin.
drugs.
It's like specifically on heroin.
Not
all drugs.
But
you can't just go like roll on Molly and listen to.
No,
house
people
music.
ain't in there just rolling up blunts. No,
Okay,
that's
got
not
it.
what's happening. No.
But around,
So a place like that offers like clean needles and
and like you do it in the space, right? Because one of the problems with heroin is that people share needles, and cities like Baltimore, high HIV infection rates. So we can actually deal with some of the public health stuff. the narrative is hard for people because they're like, you're condoning drug use.
Right.
Right.
But we might actually be limiting so many other really dangerous factors. And what the data suggests is that by the touch of you coming into the clinic or the facility, that
It's a step towards getting better.
Yep, that at a point, I can say to you, like, come on, just like, let's go to treatment, right? And actually know who you are as opposed
Exactly.
to having people sort of randomly doing drugs, which is counterintuitive. But the reality is we've tried almost everything else and it hasn't worked. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is actually getting us results in Vancouver. Ithaca is thinking about doing it. And even in places like Baltimore, police officers now have naloxone, which is an overdose inhibitor. So, or stops overdoses. So when people look like they're about to overdose, now first responders have something they can inject people with to at least keep them alive till they get to the hospital, right?
Wow.
And that's like a different way to think about public health. And when I could talk about public health forever, but one of the things I worry about in low-income communities, especially Black and Latino or marginalized communities, is this idea of like health beyond hospitals, So many people think about health as like when I go to the doctors, but so much of health is like what you do every day, right? It's like the choices you make
What you
every single
eat,
day. And we have to start talking about that, like what you eat, access to grocery stores, exercise, like, that stuff. Houston has a really innovative, this is not my platform, but has an innovative model around like public gyms, Like people need to go to the gym, right? And like if that's the only way we'll counter obesity. And how do we actually make access to them like better for people? And like a public gym is like such a fascinating idea.
How do you feel about when you read, see, or hear the term "all lives matter"?
I like hate this. It's like I think it probably is the single most effective distraction in the movement. It's just like so
The conversation around it, or
Yeah,
people
like,
saying it, or people trying to
all
use that.
of it. That like we still have to talk about it.
Sorry, we haven't had anyone in
not
here to
your
talk
fault.
about
It's
it.
not
so-
your fault. I'm
And I
like-
just saw a story this week about someone
It drives
offending
me-
someone else for
It
saying it.
drives me nuts. If I went to a breast cancer rally and somebody yelled out "colon cancer matters," people would be like, "That's not what we're talking about today, right?" Not that colon cancer is not an important
Of
thing.
course,
Very
of
important,
course.
sure.
Not the focus, right? And so
And
that is-
that sums it up pretty well,
Yeah,
though,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I do.
Well, it's ridiculous.
What's interesting about whiteness, though, is that whiteness wants to participate in everything, even oppression. And that's what's fascinating to me about all lives, man. Like, people are like, I'm oppressed too. And you're like, that is why. That's like, whiteness like doesn't know what it's like not to be in something.
Well, that's white privilege. That's what white privilege
it's incredible.
is.
You're like, even oppression.
Well, we
that's
talk
deep.
about that all the time on the program because it's like the N word, where they'll say, "Well, black people use it. How come I can't use it?"
Right.
Well,
Say,
a
no,
lot
no,
of
the-
people
the-
use
the
things that
point-
you can't use. Like,
But
why
no,
are
they
you
can't
offended?
imagine that. Like,
They-
people cannot
well,
imagine that there's something that like they can't access. That's so wild.
But the funny thing is the reason the N-word exists and you now can't say it is because you had to have such an exclusive club that there had to be a word to deride the people who couldn't be in that club. Now you want to turn around and use the word that you gave to the people who you wouldn't let in your club in the first place. What kind of shit is
deep.
that?
That's deep.
But there is a difference, right, between white people who want to feel the oppression and white people who want to know how they can support the cause, correct?
Yeah, and it's not feel the oppression, it's like participate.
Or
It's
participate.
This idea that like that one of the ways whiteness functions is that it has a license to participate in everything. The N-word, like, this idea that they're being systemically killed as well. Yeah, and there are so many people who want to do good work, right? Who like white people who understand white privilege and like want to use that privilege to disrupt that privilege, right? Like,
Yes.
You think about Macklemore. I DM. So the song came out. I DM Macklemore. I don't know. I mean, I know him now, but I DM'd him like the song. Here's my number. Text me. Would love to talk to you about it. And he like texted me the next day. We had like a great hour-long conversation about it. But people like that like get it and are trying to use their platforms to open up space to talk about this stuff. And that's really powerful. And the reality is that white people will need to start organizing white people around this because I can name white guilt, right? I can name white privilege, but I don't know what it's like to live it. And white people know what it's like to live it and can do that work.
But how do you even go about organizing? It feels weird the second you even organize white people. Like, I'd feel uncomfortable with it.
Why?
I'm trying to get some white people together. It's like the next step.
Well, I'm not trying to get them. They need to get themselves, like, I'm saying here's what the need is. And people like Macklemore, like, using his platform, like, that's what the need is.
It's really to spread the concept, right?
Yeah, and organize. White people are going to say stuff about race around white people that they'll never say about around me, which is probably for the better for them. But they need to be in a space where they can have those conversations and people can push them in ways that are safe, but they grow from. And that like has to be a part of the work at some point.
But doesn't a big part of it also have to be people having these conversations together?
Yeah. I don't live in a world where it's like either or, right? It can be both.
Yeah, as it should be.
But there is something about like I don't know. I know the impact of white privilege. Right? I know what it feels like when it is hitting me, but I don't know what it feels like to wield it. Right.
Right.
And there are people who know what it feels like to wield it that can help other people deal with the like, well, my grandfather didn't own slaves. Why does this matter to me? Stuff that like I get on a philosophical level, but like I don't. My family didn't come over here on the Mayflower as like a happy participant in the American dream.
Right. You can't fully identify with that.
Right.
How do you feel about a white person going to a protest wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt?
They should be at the protest. Everybody should be mad. There's enough to be mad about.
Plenty to go around.
Yeah.
I want you to talk to me about your experience at the White House when I saw that you shared this on social media. You had a conversation with President Obama. I believe you guys were talking about Ferguson, and you said that your conversation was robust. And can you talk to me about that experience?
So President Obama is, this is completely random. He is, it's interesting. Have you ever been to the White House?
No.
So the West Wing is small. Like it's not a big, on TV it looks like this like grand place. I mean, it is grand, but it's like tiny. So his chair is physically bigger than everybody's, which is like so fascinating because you walk in and it's like
a throne.
It's like this big chair and you're like, okay. And he is like really humble. It's really funny though because people they come into the White House like ready. They're like, oh man, I'm gonna tell Obama to do that. And then when he gets in the room, all people do is praise. They're like, President Obama, I'm so thankful. So that's really funny. But it was a lot of us there. It was like, John Lewis, Cheryl Neifel, Sharpton, Mark Morale, all these people. And we had a good conversation. And then at the end of it, he like extended it for 30 minutes so he could specifically take questions from the younger activists. And I talked to him partly about the way he talks about mass incarceration, that it is worrisome in some ways, that people think about mass incarceration as an issue of arrest. People think I think the public is like we're arresting too many people, which is true. But mass incarceration is as much about arrest as it is about bail and reentry and rehabilitation and sentencing. Like it's all of those things. And some people care about some of those things more than they care about arrest, but they're all intertwined. So I asked him to talk about that publicly a little bit more. And then talk to him about the use of force standard at the national level. When the FBI kills civilians, for instance, they don't release the names. Like that is a problem. So what we know to be true is that there's some agents who have killed many civilians, and we can't, we activists, we can't do anything about it because we barely know we don't really know who they are until somebody sues them or something. So we talked about that, and then a host of other things like the consent decrees in places. Attorney General Lynch was there. So it was a good conversation. It was like 90 minutes. And then he opened up the Oval Office. All of us went over. I took a picture there. He has one of the original programs from the March on Washington is like on a bookshelf. And it's like the only thing on the shelf, which is cool. And he was good, really, really thoughtful, humble, and like he gets it like it's almost the end, right? I think he is, I think the administration is sort of like, okay, we're coming up. But it's not going to run out of steam, So they are like running hard to the end, which is powerful to see.
How do you see Obama's role in activism, education after he's president?
I think that he'll be like much more free to say stuff. The vitriol he gets on like all sides is so different, right? This is the first Black president. And the way people demean the office now is like fascinating because, when Bush was president, the last Bush, you could not come into his presence without a sports coat on, for instance, right? Like that was that was a custom in the White House. And people were just like, that's the way to do it. Whereas Obama, people just treat him so differently.
Well, I was going to say the sports coat, they keep inviting all them rappers up there. No wonder nobody's wearing a sports coat.
Yeah. And he's just much more relaxed about those sort of things. Yeah. But people, the Republicans, like, sort of all of a sudden don't think the presidency's a real thing. And you're like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, all of a sudden you can say whatever you want because even post 9/11, when we all had the worst feelings towards President Bush,
you couldn't say anything.
Yeah, I would never. I was on the radio like close to that time. I still wouldn't say anything that was. I might say the guy's stupid. He's not smart. There are things you would say, but not hate words. You know what I'm saying? It just didn't seem appropriate, even for someone who we knew was not the sharpest stick in the bundle. And for President Obama, who's just as
qualified
and smart a president as we've had. Like he's in the conversations with the
greats,
the really smart
greats.
And he's one of the most popular politicians in America right now. FYI.
Yeah, would be but yeah, I mean, which is great. At the same time, politicians are not. Also speaks to how not popular politicians
That's
are.
fair. That came up in the meeting. Somebody said something, and he was like, "Just so you know, I am one of." It was funny.
Right.
He made a
Sure.
Chris Rock joke in the. He said something like, "Y'all are so articulate." It was, and CT Vivian was in the room, who's like this older civil rights leader, and Obama was like, "CT, don't look up Chris Rock. It's okay. Like he'll probably say some stuff that's a little offensive to you." It was like a good moment. Obama.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what he'll do. They said reports that he's going to stay in D.C. for like a year after.
His daughter is in school. He
Yep.
wants to be there for that.
Yeah.
Deray McKesson is here. He's running for mayor of Baltimore. You are doing some events here in New York City, some fundraising events. Who are you up against in Baltimore?
So this election is about the difference between the politics as usual or the politics of change, right?
That's right.
There are a lot of these establishment politicians, and it's this thing about like if the establishment is what we choose, if the familiar is who we choose, we know we're going to get, right? It's what got us here. So that really is a choice that people are making now.
Do you feel like, do you feel like people are being receptive to how young you are, B, your lack of experience in the office, or do you feel like the establishment is receptive to you? Because that's always a thing.
Yeah. I think that people want something different, right? I think that is like a general consensus in the city. The age thing has actually not come up as a huge barrier. And I think that when we get into conversations about policy or like sort of the concrete things, I think people are generally like, okay, this makes a lot of sense to me. If anything, I'm stuck. I get these conspiracy theories, right? It's like Daray's funded by the Illuminati, or like I'm doing this fundraiser.
Well, Beyonce does follow you on Twitter, bro.
And there is an Illuminati wiki, and I do have an entry in the Wikipedia.
See?
As if it's like me and Obama planned the unrest in 2012, and I just like showed up in 2014.
Got it.
That's
so
right.
that stuff happens.
Well executed.
Or like even the fundraiser here, people are like, Deray is fundraising. And you're like, well, how? First it was I'm a millionaire.
Well,
now I'm broke and I'm fundraising, and people are like, I can't believe he's raising money. And you're like, what?
See, I'm all of what you're talking about, I don't see. I'm not that deep in it, but that's your world. Like I see a young man who's going for an office that represents his childhood, his family, and things he believes in, and that's why I invited you up here. I don't know much. I wouldn't even proclaim to know as much as him about politics, and she knows
I'm learning
more
as I
than
go.
me, right? I just know what I read and what I've learned in life, but I just saw a young man doing something dope, and I wanted to bring him up so he could have a platform to talk about it.
And speaking of which, how can people give you money?
DerayForMayor.com.
Deray, Deray, formayor.com.
Yeah, I'd love to know though, like, what do you expect out of politics? Like, if you had,
I first expect people to listen. My expectation is you work for me, and you should listen. That's any government office. And I've been in a high tax bracket for a long time. Been in media since 1990. Been making a lot of money for a long time, right? So, even in that, I also expect you to hold corporations accountable for making money on the backs of us folks that work hard every day. And if you're gonna make money in the United States, you should have some obligation to make sure that the workforce in America is prepared to take the jobs that are available here, because that's what this country, the idea was. That's the promo. The promo was that we get this pursuit, right? And if the jobs aren't available and you're not preparing through public school for people to pursue, you're messing up the hope idea, and then people feel hopeless, and then there's crime, and then there's all this other shit, drug use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the people making the most money, it's on you to make sure that the hope idea, the promo is still there. You know what I'm saying? Keep the promo going. Otherwise, we got other problems, and it fucks everybody's shit up, to speak really like a layman, and that's my expectation.
I mean, I do think people have expectations for people in the office that you're running for, right? Like, I think all of us have given up, or many people have given up on Washington. But local politics, I think now people have learned, like, I don't really care about the president, but I want to know. And so in particular in a place like Baltimore, which I know well from growing up outside D.C., it's a place where you do think, and I think people will believe, if they see a young, bright kid, black, from Baltimore, leading in Baltimore, there will be expectations, which is fortunate, which is good for you, because obviously you're someone who wouldn't be doing this if you didn't want to meet those expectations. But I do think that when it comes to local politics, people still do think that people can make an impact on a lot of the things like you were talking about, even though people are accustomed to people coming up short so often.
yes.
As far as support goes, because I remember I also read that I saw a video floating around, the Love is the Why video.
My dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk to me a little bit about that video and what kind of support you're getting from your family?
Yeah, so my family's been great. If anything, my father doesn't get on Twitter because I blocked about 18,000 people on Twitter.
Was
so
your
it
dad
is,
one of them?
No. But he
You didn't
he
want
gets
him
all
to deal
worked
with
up.
it.
He'll see that. He's like, Deray, I can't believe that person. I'm like, Daddy, just get off Twitter. It's okay. But they've been really good. My father, my sister have been great about it. And he made that video. It's one of our first campaign videos. Love is the why, and this is why we do the work, and it's about love. And he did it, and it's great. And I talk about him often because he got clean when I was 3, and I grew up seeing him help other people put their lives together, and that fundamentally changed the way I think about the world. I've seen people recover. People hit rock bottom and come out of it, which gives me this eternal fountain of hope, right? I know that our tomorrows can be better than our todays because I've lived it, and that's powerful to me.
So could I say for people who don't get to follow every detail of a campaign or what's actually happened because they're busy with their own lives and families, and it's hard for them to keep up and do the research, because that's a tough thing for people when it comes to picking their vote or figuring out somebody's campaign. They just don't. There's not enough time in the day for the hardworking American to just follow every detail, so they see the headlines. It sounds like what you're saying for Baltimore, the money's available to fix the issues, but it's about reallocating how the funds are used and redesigning how we think about and approach the issues that Baltimore has.
Yep, strategy and scale. Yep. So a ton of resources, but not connected. And that's the strategy piece.
Connected to
Even each other, right? So what does it mean when you have 5 treatment programs, and if I say I need treatment, there's literally no way for me to know where to go, right? Or if this one doesn't work, how do I know the difference between them? We can actually do that at the city level. And that's a strategy piece. And the scale is if we don't address 70,000 addicts, then we might as well, we're actually not moving the needle, right? So if we have a strategy that focuses on 100 people, that is amazing for those 100 people, doesn't deal with the problem of addiction.
Now I live in Baltimore. And the problems of Baltimore, I find this hard to believe, but let's assume there are people like this because there's selfish people everywhere who only care about them and theirs.
Yep.
The problems that Baltimore is having don't affect anyone in my life or me. Why should I care about Deray?
Yeah, so that's the thing, though, it does, right? So the city is not as safe as you want it to be because of these other things.
You can only go to such specific places in Baltimore if you want to go out in Baltimore. You
can go to more, but you feel like you can only go to
or
some,
right. Or you feel like you can. That's what I'm saying. For them in their mind, it's I can only go to the harbor.
Yep.
Don't you want to feel like you can enjoy everything Baltimore has to offer?
So these 344 murders completely change the way you think about safety in the city. And that is because we're not dealing with all this other stuff. So this actually does impact your life so deeply. And then there's some, we do need to think about development beyond the harbor, right? That there are anchor institutions all across the city we need to develop. There are a host of other things that are really important as well. People want the harbor to be swimmable by 2020, and the amount of sewage we're dumping in doesn't look like we're going to get there, right? So a host of other sort of seemingly smaller things. But the rest of the stuff really matters. You think about what does it mean that the workforce isn't what there's not enough money in the economy right now because people don't have jobs that have ladders, that have career ladders, and that actually impacts you and the quality of life in the city. So it is pushing back and helping people understand all of this is yours too, right? You in the city, these are your problems. They might not hit you as viscerally as they hit other people, but you are dealing with them when you think about safety, when you think about what school you're sending your kid to, when you think about which street you're going to walk down. This is yours.
And he's got the Patagonia vest on, which makes him accessible to whitey.
I was going to say
the
exact same thing. I think that was his little nod to white people. I'm cool. I've got a
Patagonia on, my
It's a good vest.
He went to Bowdoin in Maine. All right, come on.
It's a good vest.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Deray McKesson, is there anything that we left out before this conversation's up?
I appreciate all of y'all. Y'all are great.
I think you're doing something awesome. And if you guys are watching this or listening and you don't know who this is, do your research, and we appreciate your work.
DerayForMayor.com.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Give it up.